For years, people wondered why the world's most fearless action star could run toward danger, yet never walk toward his own daughter. Today, at 19, Suri Noel, the girl the world once knew as Suri Cruise, has finally broken her silence. She isn't speaking through interviews or talk shows, but through the life she has chosen to build far away from her father's shadow. And what she reveals is heavier, sadder, and far more painful than anyone ever expected. This is the truth she has carried alone for more than a decade. The day everything started to break. When Suri Noel looks back on her life, she can trace every fracture to a moment she was far too young to understand. She was born on April 18, 2006, at St. John's Health Center in Santa Monica, a birth wrapped not in celebration, but in silence. Her mother, Katie Holmes, followed Scientology's silent birth expectations, holding back every sound of pain while men in black suits stood in the room, watching and enforcing rituals she didn't choose. Tom Cruise called it devotion. Katie called it survival. And for Suri, it became the first memory she never asked for. A beginning shaped by rules she would spend her entire childhood running from. During her earliest years, Suri lived inside a world crafted to look perfect from the outside. Red carpets, magazine covers, private estates, security teams, the image of a happy Hollywood family. But behind closed doors, cracks were already forming. Katie's parents were alarmed by the growing influence surrounding their daughter and granddaughter. Friends noticed that Katie rarely went anywhere alone, always surrounded by Scientology associates who moved like silent shadows, monitoring her movements as if she were living under an unspoken surveillance. Still, Suri didn't know any of that. What she knew were footsteps in the hallway, movie nights with her parents, warm arms lifting her up, and a father who seemed larger than life. But when she turned 6, the footsteps stopped. The house went quiet, and the man who once held her hand on the streets of New York suddenly disappeared from her daily life. June 2012 became the year everything changed. Her mother filed for divorce just days before Tom Cruise's 50th birthday, in what would become one of Hollywood's fastest and most shocking separations. To the world, it looked like a celebrity split. To a 6-year-old girl, it felt like losing half of her universe without warning. And yet, Suri didn't cry out. She simply went silent, because children don't need explanations to understand that someone they love is gone. Katie Holmes' silent war. In the months after the divorce filing, the world thought Katie Holmes had made a bold, sudden decision. But the truth Suri only understood years later, was that Katie had been planning her escape with military-level precision. Behind the polished smiles on magazine covers, she lived in a state of constant fear. She changed phones repeatedly. She avoided certain hallways in their home because she believed they were monitored. She replaced staff she thought were reporting back to the Church of Scientology. And every night, she held her daughter a little tighter, terrified that one wrong step would cost her custody. Katie chose New York as her battleground because she knew its laws favored a parent seeking to protect a child's stability. She filed everything while Tom was in Iceland filming Oblivion, ensuring he wouldn't see it coming. He didn't. He discovered the divorce the same way everyone else did, through the headlines. And for a man who spent decades exerting total control over his public persona, this was a blow that cut deep. Court documents later revealed the one thing Katie fought for above all, the right to raise Suri outside Scientology. Former members claimed Katie feared that as Suri grew older, she could be pushed into the church's strict Sea Org program, a place she believed no child should ever be forced into. To prevent that future, she was willing to sacrifice her career, her friendships, her safety, and every ounce of privacy she had left. By July 2012, only 11 days after filing, the divorce was finalized. Tom agreed to pay around $400,000 a year in child support, cover medical and educational costs, and accept that Katie would have full custody. Money was not what Katie wanted. Freedom was. The next day, she and Suri left Los Angeles like ghosts, slipping into a new life in New York City with nothing but a few suitcases and the hope that distance could save them. And for Suri, that sudden move felt like waking up in a world where her father existed everywhere, on screens, on posters, in newspapers, but not in the seat beside her. Growing up with an invisible father. For most children, memories of their father come from bedtime stories, weekend trips, and school events. But for Suri, the memories she held onto were fading snapshots from before she turned 6. The last time she truly felt like she had a complete family. After the move to New York, life became a quiet routine shaped entirely by her mother's protection. Katie walked her to school, cooked simple dinners, helped her with homework, and tried her best to shield her from the relentless attention that followed them everywhere. But there was one thing she couldn't shield her from: the silence. As the years passed, Suri watched her father not as a daughter, but as a distant spectator. She saw him hanging off skyscrapers, racing through action scenes, performing stunts no other actor dared to attempt. Every time she walked into a bookstore or past a movie theater, his face was there. He was everywhere, except in her life. And that absence carried a weight that grew heavier with every birthday that passed without a message, without a call, without a single sign that he remembered the child he once called a miracle. When she turned 10, the questions inside her began to sharpen. Where is Dad? Slowly became, why doesn't he come? She tried to comfort herself by imagining he was just busy. Too busy saving the world on screen to show up in her world off screen. But even a child eventually understands the difference between a schedule and a choice. By her early teens, she noticed her friends being picked up by their fathers after rehearsals or sports practices. She stood quietly at the curb, pretending she didn't mind, pretending it didn't sting. She grew up learning emotional independence not by choice but by necessity. She rode the subway alone, finished school projects by herself, and carried her disappointments in silence so her mother wouldn't worry. Meanwhile, the media continued to speculate. Reports circulated in 2013 that Tom had only seen Suri once after the divorce. After that, there were no confirmed visits, no photos, nothing. To the world, it became a story of Hollywood mystery. To Suri, it was simply her life. A life shaped by a father who felt more like a rumor than a memory. And yet, even in the emptiness, she never learned how to hate him. Children don't hate. They ache. The truth she learned in silence. By the time Suri turned 14 in 2020, she was old enough to search for answers on her own. She had grown up quietly hearing fragments of conversations adults tried to hide from her. Whispers about Scientology, custody battles, rules, restrictions, and the word control, spoken with a tension she never forgot. For years, she didn't understand any of it. But when the world shut down during the pandemic, and she finally had time alone with her thoughts, she began looking for the truth that no one had ever explained to her. She read interviews, documentaries, and testimonies from former Scientology members. And although she didn't know the full story, she suddenly saw herself reflected between the lines, not as someone mentioned directly, but as the collateral of a system she never chose to be part of. Former members had often described being discouraged from staying close to people who were not inside the organization. Some even claimed that relationships could be severed if a family member left or refused involvement. Suri was a child, not a threat, but she understood what outside meant. It meant distance. It meant separation. It meant a father who could not, or would not, cross a line set by something bigger than love. And that realization broke something inside her. She didn't grow up hating Tom Cruise. She grew up waiting for him. waiting for a birthday message, waiting for a visit, waiting for a moment where he would choose her over everything else. But the older she became, the more she realized she had been standing in a doorway for 12 years, hoping for footsteps she would never hear again. At 15, she walked into the kitchen one morning and caught her mother quietly wiping her eyes after reading an article about Tom's latest blockbuster premiere. Suri didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. The truth between them was heavy, unspoken, and mutual. Katie had carried the weight of her daughter's abandonment for years, alone. Even so, Katie never spoke badly about Tom. She never used bitterness to shield Suri from the truth. Instead, she held on to one belief. Some truths are too painful to give a child before they are ready, and by 16, Suri was finally ready. Not for the media's truth, but for her own. Finding her voice at 18. Turning 18 in April 2024 was not just a birthday for Suri. It was a breaking point. It was the moment the law finally recognized her as someone who could make her own decisions, speak her own truth, and define her identity without permission from anyone, including the man whose last name she had carried her entire life. In the weeks leading up to her birthday, she worked on her college application essays, pouring years of silence into sentences that shook even the admissions board. She wrote, "Sometimes we don't grow up with love. We grow up with the space that love leaves behind." It was the first time she had ever said, even privately, what she had felt since she was 6. She didn't mention her father by name. She didn't need to. The entire world knew who she meant, and yet for the first time, the story belonged to her and not to the headlines. While other teenagers celebrated their 18th birthdays with parties, Suri spent hers staring at her reflection in the mirror, seeing a young woman who had spent half her life grieving someone who was still alive. She realized she no longer needed to wait for a phone call that never came, a hug that never arrived, or an explanation that would never be offered. That was the day she made a quiet, powerful decision. She would no longer carry the burden of being Tom Cruise's daughter. On May 17, 2024, she signed the paperwork to change her name to Suri Noel Holmes, choosing her mother's middle name as a tribute to the woman who had carried her through a storm alone. She didn't cry. She expected to. Instead, she felt relief. The kind of relief that comes when a person finally stops holding onto a thread that has only caused pain. The world noticed her name change instantly. It appeared in her high school graduation program. It appeared on the cast list for her performance in the Addams Family musical, and later it appeared on her acceptance documents for Carnegie Mellon University, where she began majoring in fashion. People called it an act of rebellion, but it wasn't. It was an act of freedom, the kind a girl finds only after surviving 12 years of silence, stepping into a life without his shadow. By the time Suri started her freshman year at Carnegie Mellon University in the fall of 2024, she had already completed the transformation she had spent years building toward. She was no longer the child whose every step was photographed, no longer the girl the world pitied for growing up without her father, and no longer the symbol of a marriage that Hollywood believed would last forever. She was simply a young woman studying fashion, riding the Pittsburgh and New York subways like everyone else, and finally living a life untouched by the pressure of her last name. Katie visited her often, helping her move into her dorm, carrying boxes with tired but grateful hands, smiling the smile of a mother who knew she had done the impossible. She had raised a daughter who survived fame, survived abandonment, survived the weight of a global celebrity's silence, and still grew into a grounded, kind, driven human being. In interviews, Katie said only one thing about her daughter: she's an incredible person. But the truth is, Suri's resilience came directly from her. Meanwhile, Tom Cruise continued living a life of extremes, filming major franchises, preparing for a NASA-supported movie that would partially shoot in outer space, signing new multi-million-dollar deals, breaking stunts that defied belief. The world cheered every time he risked his life on a helicopter, on a skyscraper, or on a moving train. But what he never risked again was walking across a room to rebuild a relationship with the little girl who once ran into his arms. Insiders say he still pays for her education and medical expenses, just as the 2012 settlement required. But he has not been photographed with her in more than a decade. And according to those close to the family, there have been no private visits, no phone calls that anyone knows of, and no steps taken to close the gap between them. Suri, now 19, has accepted that silence. She no longer expects her father to show up. She no longer checks her phone on her birthday. She no longer waits at the doorway of her memory for a man who never returns. Instead, she carries on, building her own identity, her own dreams, her own future. And the little girl who once cried into her hands now walks confidently into adulthood with the name she chose, Suri Noel Holmes. For the first time in her life, the truth isn't something she fears. It's something she owns. Her story raises a simple question. If you were in her place, would you reach out again or finally let go? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more untold stories.